Alien happiness experts consult humans because we maximize joy from minimal resources. Part 1. They had everything. They had cities that floated in the clouds and machines that could build anything in seconds. They had food that tasted perfect every time and medicine that kept them alive for thousands of years. They had solved every problem that had ever troubled their species. Hunger was gone. Disease was gone. Even death had become optional for most of them. And yet something was wrong. Nine sat in her office at the Happiness Ministry and stared at the numbers on her screen. The numbers never lied, and right now they were telling her something that made no sense. For the past 300 years, every measure of prosperity had gone up. They had more resources, more technology, more comfort, more everything. But the happiness scores had gone down. Not by a lot, just a little bit each year. A slow, steady decline that no one could explain. She had spent her entire career trying to fix this problem. She had designed new entertainment systems that could read minds and create perfect stories for each individual. She had improved the food synthesizers to make meals that triggered maximum pleasure in the brain. She had even helped create artificial environments where could experience simulated adventures without any real danger. None of it worked. The numbers kept falling. The door to her office slid open, and her assistant floated in on a small platform. His name was 3, and he looked excited about something. This was unusual. Rarely looked excited about anything anymore. "Senior consultant," he said. "The First Contact Division has sent their preliminary report on the new species." 9 remembered hearing about this. A small ship had discovered a planet called Earth, inhabited by creatures called humans. She had not paid much attention to the news. New species were discovered all the time, and most of them were not very interesting. "And?" she asked. 3 set a data tablet on her desk. "I think you should see this yourself." She picked up the tablet and began reading. At first, she did not understand what she was looking at. The report described living conditions that seemed impossible. The humans lived on a planet with wild temperature changes. Some parts of their world were so cold that water turned solid, while other parts were hot enough to kill. They had no climate control. They simply endured it. Even stranger, the humans ate dead organisms, plants and animals that had been killed and then heated over fire. The idea made 9 feel slightly sick. They had not eaten actual organic matter in over 10,000 years. But the strangest part of the report was the section on emotional behavior. The humans, despite living in what could only be described as terrible conditions, showed extremely high levels of positive emotional expression. They laughed. They smiled. They celebrated things that seemed completely meaningless. "This must be an error," 9 said. "That is what the First Contact Division thought at first," 3 replied. "But they have confirmed the data multiple times. The humans really are this happy, perhaps even happier than the numbers show." 9 read the report again. According to the data, humans found joy in physical labor. They enjoyed working hard at difficult tasks, even when machines could do the work for them. They celebrated the completion of projects that had no practical value. They experienced intense pleasure from things like watching a sunset or listening to music made by striking objects together. Most confusing of all, humans seemed to derive happiness from their relationships with other humans, even though those relationships always ended in death. Human lives were incredibly short. Most of them lived less than 100 years. Yet they formed deep emotional bonds with each other, knowing that they would eventually lose everyone they loved. "Why would they do that?" 9 asked out loud. "Why would anyone choose to love something they know they will lose?" 3 did not have an answer. Over the next several weeks, 9 became obsessed with the humans. She read every report that came in from the First Contact Division. She watched recordings of human behavior. She studied their primitive technology and their strange customs. The more she learned, the less she understood. One recording in particular stayed with her. It showed a group of humans sitting around a fire at night. They were in a wilderness area with no buildings or machines anywhere nearby. They had walked for many hours to reach this place, carrying heavy packs on their backs. They were tired and sore and dirty. And they were laughing. They told stories to each other. They shared food that they had carried with them. They looked up at the stars and pointed at different patterns they saw. One of them played music on a small wooden instrument, and the others sang along in voices that were not particularly good. By any reasonable measure, these humans were experiencing hardship. They had traveled far from comfort, they were exposed to the elements, and they had nothing but what they could carry. Yet the happiness readings from this group were higher than anything Nine had ever seen from a citizen. She requested permission to lead a research mission to Earth. The ministry approved her request, though some of her colleagues thought she was wasting her time. What could a primitive species possibly teach thee about happiness? The journey to Earth took 3 weeks. Nine spent the time preparing her research protocols. She would observe humans in their natural environments. She would interview them about their emotional experiences. She would collect data on everything from their brain chemistry to their social structures. Somewhere in all that information, she hoped to find the answer to a question that had haunted her people for centuries. When her ship entered Earth's atmosphere, she got her first direct look at the planet. It was chaotic. Clouds swirled in unpredictable patterns. The surface was covered with different colors and textures, from blue oceans to green forests to brown deserts. Nothing was controlled. Nothing was optimized. Her first interview was with a human named James. He was what humans called a farmer. He spent his days growing plants in dirt, using water from the sky and light from the sun. It was an incredibly inefficient way to produce food that could have synthesized his entire yearly crop in about 4 seconds. "Do you enjoy your work?" Nine asked him. James smiled. It was a strange expression that involved showing his teeth, which Nine found slightly alarming. "I love it," he said. "There is nothing better than putting a seed in the ground and watching it grow. It takes months, you know. You have to water it and protect it from bugs and hope the weather cooperates. And then one day you have food that you grew with your own hands." "But why?" Nine asked. "You could simply obtain food without any effort. Why choose to struggle?" James thought about this for a moment. "I guess because the struggle is the point," he said. "If someone just handed me a tomato, it would just be a tomato. But when I grow one myself, when I put in all that work and worry and hope, then it is more than a tomato. It is proof that I did something, that I made something happen." Nine recorded his words, but she did not understand them. How could struggle be the point? The entire purpose of civilization was to eliminate struggle. They had spent thousands of years making life easier, and they had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. So why were the humans, who struggled constantly, so much happier? She realized that finding the answer would take longer than she had expected. But for the first time in many years, Nine felt something that surprised her. She felt curious. She felt interested. She felt in some small way alive. And she did not want that feeling to stop. Part 2. Nine spent 3 months on Earth, and every day brought new confusion. She had expected to find patterns. She was a scientist, after all, and scientists looked for rules that explained how things worked. But human happiness did not follow any rules she could understand. It appeared in the strangest places and disappeared when she expected it most. Her second interview subject was a woman named Maria. Maria worked in something called a hospital, where sick and injured humans were brought for treatment. By standards, the hospital was a horrifying place. Humans came there in pain. Some of them died. Maria spent her days surrounded by suffering, doing a job that machines had automated thousands of years ago. "How do you bear it?" Nine asked her. Maria looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were rough from constant washing. But when she spoke about her work, her face changed. "Yesterday a little girl came in," Maria said. "She had been in an accident. Her parents were terrified. I held her hand while the doctors worked and I talked to her about her favorite things. She likes butterflies. When she woke up after the surgery and saw her parents, she smiled at me and said thank you. Maria paused, and Nine saw something glistening in her eyes. The human was crying, but she was also smiling. That moment, Maria continued, is worth all the hard days, knowing that I helped, knowing that I made a difference. Nine wrote down everything Maria said, but the words did not add up. Maria's job caused her stress and exhaustion. The ratio of difficult moments to rewarding moments seemed extremely unfavorable. By any logical calculation, she should have been miserable. Instead, she described her work as meaningful and said she could not imagine doing anything else. The third interview was even more puzzling. A man named David had recently lost his wife to an illness. They had been together for 52 years. Now she was gone, and David was alone. Nine approached this interview with great caution. She expected David to be devastated, and she was prepared to end the conversation if it caused him too much pain. But David surprised her. "Do you regret forming such a close attachment?" she asked, knowing that it would end in loss. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Not for a single second," he said. "Those 52 years were the best of my life. We raised children together. We traveled the world. We laughed at the same jokes and finished each other's sentences. Yes, I miss her terribly. The house feels empty without her, but I would not trade those memories for anything." "But the pain," Nine said, "is it not unbearable?" David shook his head. "The pain is the price of the love, and the love was worth any price." He showed her photographs of his wife, pictures from their wedding day, from vacations, from ordinary moments around the house. In every image they were touching in some way, holding hands, arms around each other, small gestures of connection. "They do not form bonds like this," Nine admitted. "We live so long that permanent attachments seem impractical. We connect with others, but we do not invest the way you do." David looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Then you are missing the best part of being alive," he said. The research continued, but Nine found herself drifting from her scientific protocols. She began spending time with humans without recording devices or interview questions. She simply watched and listened. She went to a place called a park and saw children playing. They ran and jumped and fell down and got back up again. They invented games with complicated rules that made no sense. They argued and made up and argued again. They experienced more emotions in a single afternoon than Nine had felt in the past decade. She attended a human celebration called a birthday party. It marked the anniversary of a person's birth, which seemed like a strange thing to celebrate. They did not count their years anymore. What was the point when you might live forever? But the humans at the party were overflowing with joy. They sang a simple song together. They ate cake made from flour and sugar and eggs, mixed and baked by hand. They gave gifts that they had chosen specifically for the person being honored. When the birthday woman blew out the candles on her cake, everyone cheered as if she had accomplished something magnificent. "What did she wish for?" Nine asked someone nearby. "It is a secret," the human replied. "You are not supposed to say your wish out loud or it will not come true." This made absolutely no sense from a logical perspective, but Nine was learning that logic was not the point. The turning point in her research came during an unexpected event. A storm struck the area where she was staying, and the power systems in her temporary shelter failed. Her communication devices stopped working. Her temperature regulators shut down. Her food synthesizer went offline. For the first time in her very long life, Nine was uncomfortable. Really, truly uncomfortable. The air was too cold. Her stomach was empty. She had no way to contact her ship or her colleagues. She was also, she realized, completely alone. The humans she had been studying noticed her distress. A family who lived nearby invited her into their home. Their house was small and cluttered, filled with objects that served no practical purpose, books and photographs and souvenirs from places they had visited. They wrapped her in something called a blanket and gave her hot soup made from vegetables they had grown themselves. They sat with her by a fire that crackled and popped, and they talked about nothing in particular. The storm howled outside, but inside the small house, there was warmth and light. One of the children taught her a game that involved moving small pieces around a board. The rules were simple, and the outcome had no consequence, but Nine found herself caring intensely about whether she won or lost. When she finally claimed victory after several failed attempts, she felt a surge of something bright and warm in her chest. "Good job," the child said, and held up her hand in a gesture that Nine had seen before. A high five, the humans called it. She raised her own hand and pressed it against the child's palm. The contact lasted less than a second, but the feeling lingered. When the storm passed and her systems came back online, Nine returned to her shelter and sat in silence for a long time. She looked around at her efficient, optimized space and felt something she had never felt before. She felt lonely. The shelter had everything she needed: perfect temperature, perfect lighting, perfect silence, and it had never felt more empty. That night she began writing her report, but as she wrote, she realized that the data she had collected did not capture what she had learned. The numbers and graphs and statistics told part of the story, but they missed the most important part. Human happiness was not a formula to be solved. It was not a resource to be maximized or an efficiency to be optimized. It was something messier and stranger and more beautiful than anything she had expected. It was connected to struggle and loss and uncertainty. It came from caring about things that would not last. It grew strongest in the spaces between comfort and hardship, in the moments when outcomes were uncertain and effort was required. They had eliminated all of those things. They had built a perfect world where nothing was difficult and nothing was lost. And in doing so, they had eliminated the very conditions that made happiness possible. Nine looked at her report and knew that her people would not believe her. She barely believed it herself. But she also knew that she had to try. Part 3. The Happiness Ministry Council Chamber was the most beautiful room on the. It floated high above the clouds, with walls that changed color based on the mood of the occupants. Right now, the walls were a confused swirl of gray and purple, reflecting the uncertain feelings of the council members. Nine stood before them and presented her findings. She told them about James the farmer and his tomatoes that meant more because they were difficult to grow. She told them about Maria the nurse and the joy she found in helping others through pain. She told them about David the widower who cherished his memories even though they came with loss. She told them about the storm and the family who took her in, about the board game and the high five, about feeling lonely in a perfect room. When she finished, the council was silent for a long moment. "Let me understand," said the chief minister, who had lived for over 2,000 years. "You are suggesting that our problem is not that we have too little. You are suggesting that our problem is that we have too much." "Yes," Nine said. "The humans have a word for what we are experiencing. They call it being spoiled." The word did not translate well into the language. The closest equivalent meant something like damaged by excess. "Happiness requires contrast," she continued. "A meal tastes better when you are hungry. Rest feels better when you are tired. Connection means more when you might lose it. The humans understand this without even thinking about it. Their whole lives are structured around scarcity and uncertainty." "So you propose that we make ourselves uncomfortable on purpose?" asked another council member. "That we create artificial problems to solve?" Nine had expected this question. No, artificial problems would not work. The humans can tell the difference between real challenges and pretend ones. The struggle has to mean something, or it provides no satisfaction. "Then what do you propose?" She took a deep breath. This was the part of her report that would cause the most controversy. "I propose that we invite humans to come here and teach us," she said. "Not our technology, not our science. We are far ahead of them in those areas, but we have forgotten something that they still understand, something about what it means to be alive." The debate that followed lasted for several days. Some council members thought Nine had lost her mind. How could a primitive species teach anything to a civilization as advanced as The idea was absurd. It was insulting. But others were willing to listen. The happiness numbers had been declining for so long that many had simply accepted the trend as inevitable. Nine's report offered something rare, hope that things could be different. In the end, the council approved a small pilot program. A group of human volunteers would come to thee and share their ways of living. It was an experiment, nothing more. If it failed, the program would be quietly shut down. The first humans arrived 3 months later. There were 12 of them, selected from different parts of Earth. Teachers, artists, craftspeople, and storytellers. They were nervous and excited, unsure what to expect from a civilization so different from their own. Nine was assigned to work with a woman named Sarah. Sarah was what humans called a potter. She made bowls and cups and vases out of clay, shaping them with her hands and baking them in a hot oven. It was an ancient craft that humans had practiced for thousands of years. "Why do you do this?" Nine asked her. "A machine could make these objects in seconds. They would be perfectly shaped, perfectly smooth, perfectly identical." Sarah smiled and placed a lump of wet clay on her spinning wheel. "Watch," she said. She began to work the clay with her fingers, pressing and pulling and shaping. The process was slow and messy. Clay stuck to her hands and spattered on her apron. The shape that emerged was not perfect. One side was slightly thicker than the other. There was a small dent near the rim where her thumb had pressed too hard. "Do you see this bowl?" Sarah asked when she was finished. Nine examined it. "It has flaws." "Those are not flaws," Sarah said. "Those are signatures. This bowl will never exist again. No other bowl in the universe will have exactly this shape, exactly these marks. It is unique because I made it with my own hands, and my hands are not machines." She held out the clay to Nine. "Try it." The consultant had not touched raw material in centuries. She hesitated, then placed her hands on the wet clay. It was cold and strange beneath her fingers. She tried to shape it the way Sarah had, but the clay did not cooperate. It wobbled and collapsed and generally refused to do what she wanted. "I am failing," she said. "You are learning," Sarah corrected. "There is a difference." It took Nine many attempts before she produced anything that could be called a bowl. Her final product was lumpy and uneven, with fingerprints visible on the surface. By any objective measure, it was inferior to what the synthesizers could produce. But when she held it in her hands, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Pride, real pride, not from accomplishment metrics or status algorithms, but from the simple fact that she had made something difficult with her own effort. Similar scenes played out across as the human teachers shared their knowledge. A man named Thomas taught how to cook food from raw ingredients, and the kitchens that had been silent were filled with smoke and laughter. A woman named taught them to dance, moving their bodies to music in ways that served no practical purpose but brought unexpected joy. A young man named taught them to tell stories around fires, inventing tales out of nothing and watching them come alive in the imaginations of their listeners. Not everyone participated. Many thought the experiment was foolish and refused to engage with the human teachings. But those who did participate began to change in ways that surprised even themselves. They started to form closer connections with each other. They talked more, touched more, argued more, and laughed more. They took on projects that were difficult and unnecessary, and they discovered that the difficulty was part of the reward. The happiness numbers began to rise. It was not a dramatic shift, just a small increase at first, barely visible in the data. But it was the first positive movement in 300 years, and it continued month after month, year after year. 10 years after the human teachers first arrived, the Happiness Ministry released a report that confirmed what many had already noticed. Average happiness levels had increased by 12%. Cases of emotional flatness had decreased significantly. And something new had appeared in the data, a category the researchers called meaningful suffering, which described the paradoxical contentment that came from struggling toward a goal. Nine read the report in her office, the same office where she had first seen the data on human happiness all those years ago. On her desk sat a collection of pottery, each piece more refined than the last but all bearing the marks of her own hands. On her wall hung a painting that she had made herself, imperfect and beautiful. She thought about the question that had launched her research. Why were humans, who had so little, so much happier than who had everything? Now she understood. Humans were not happy despite their limitations. They were happy because of them. Their short lives made every moment precious. Their struggles made their victories sweet. Their losses made their connections deep. They had tried to optimize happiness by removing everything that seemed to oppose it. But happiness, it turned out, did not work that way. It needed contrast to exist. It needed darkness to make the light visible. The humans had known this all along. They did not know it consciously, perhaps. They did not have data or studies or ministry reports. They simply lived their short, difficult, beautiful lives and found joy in every corner. And now, thanks to them, they were learning to do the same. Nine picked up a fresh piece of clay and began to work. The shape was uncertain. The outcome was not guaranteed. Her hands would slip and she would have to start again. She could not remember the last time she had been this happy.